Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts. My name is Danielle Roberge. I'm Cultural Programming Officer. The MMFA is really proud to present in a Canadian exclusive the exhibition From Van Gogh to Kandinsky. The art, produced by the French and German avant-garde between the end of the 19th century and the outbreak of World War I, is widely celebrated today. Its creators include such renowned artists as Van Gogh, Gauguin, Matisse, Picasso, Cézanne, and Kandinsky. Their works, distinguished by their originality, power, and beauty, are considered among the early masterpieces of modern art. When art history chronicled this fascinating era, two discrete critical discourses emerged, positing distinct French and German movements. Thanks to the extensive research of our guest, Timothy Benson, curator of the Robert Gore Rifkind Center for German Expressionist Studies at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, this exhibition provides us with a broader understanding of the complex cross-cultural influences during the period, which gave rise to this phenomenally rich and compelling artistic production. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the curator of this spectacular exhibition, Timothy Benson.
Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I really want to stress how much of a team effort this exhibition is. And Nathalie Bondil and Anne Grace were very instrumental in bringing some of the fantastic paintings here that you see, as well as some that we have in Los Angeles. So there are many people that got very excited about this project. Also, the authors in the catalog, one of whom is in Montreal right now, Claudine Gromont. They were also very, very helpful. And so it was a period of exchange that I like to equate with the period of exchange that we're looking at in the period 1900 to 1914. This is a very open kind of exchange. Things are different in the 21st century, but nonetheless, it's a wonderful collaborative process. Now, it might seem strange that I'm in charge of an Expressionist Studies Center for almost 30 years, and I still want to ask the question, what is Expressionism and where did it come from? I suppose you could say there are many answers, and each generation may ask that question, but I like to see exhibitions as kinds of inquiries. And then that means that there are many answers, and that means that the narrative that the curator presents should be opened so that there are many interpretations. Some of you may have a different one that may be also valid. So it's a bit of an open system. And I think that it's also interesting to imagine if we ask the agents who created this movement. So if you did get in a time machine and go back to 1905, which was when we think of Expressionism as being born, and if you were to ask, where are the Expressionists? No one would have any idea what you're talking about. And this is in part because no one used the term. They used other terms. No one used the term Expressionism, and when they began using it, it was in an unexpected way. In fact, one of the first times the term Expressionists was used in an art context was at this exhibition, which was the 22nd Secession exhibition in Berlin. And in the catalog essay, Paul Kassir wrote that he was very, very proud to be able to present a number of young artists, French painters, the Expressionists. That's what he called them, not the Germans. And especially the Fauves were seen in this exhibition, although that term also was still in evolution. Notice the poster, however, is entirely Jugendstil. But it is interesting to contemplate then that if you were imagining what styles were prominent around 1905, Jugendstil is one of them. This is Heine, who is one of our very famous Jugendstil artists and poster makers. And also, of course, I mentioned the secession. The secession in Berlin was very impressionist-oriented. Artists like Max Liebermann had very, very important collections of French Impressionists. Well, among the artists who were being called fauves was Kees van Dongen. And we're very fortunate to have a prime example from around the time of the exhibition. And this was one actually that wasn't seen in the LA or Zurich venues of the exhibition, but the selection is brought to Montreal by Montreal's own Anne Grace. And we are really happy to have it. And so this is one of the things that was meant by Expressionists in 1911. By the way, he's not a French artist and he's not a German artist. He's a Dutch artist. So I like to stress that in this period you had a great degree of internationalism, or we could call it cosmopolitanism, in this exchange among various groups. Now, if we were to ask what people were talking about in 1905, that official birth date of Expressionism and Fauvism, we would get a fairly clear answer. Paul Gauguin, Paul Cézanne, such neo-impressionist predecessors as Paul Signac, and above all, Vincent van Gogh. Van Gogh, according to one German observer, struck modern art like lightning. Van Gogh was more widely exhibited in Germany than anywhere else, including France. But we know he was greatly appreciated everywhere, including France. And it's interesting that we have in Montreal a self-portrait. It's very important because actually the man was known in Germany much, even before his art was known. So the poets, for example, were reading Baudelaire. The German poets were very interested in the symbolist poets and so forth. They were very excited, the whole literati scene in Berlin were very excited by this guy, Vincent van Gogh, who was a hero of modern art, yet they hadn't seen his work. And maybe once finally they saw his work in black and white, and soon they would be able to read his letters, which are translated into German. So I'd like to imagine what it must have been like the first time a German artist saw a Van Gogh. It's interesting, I think, also for visitors of the exhibition. Just imagine what it was like for the first time to see a sky that's even more yellow than you ever see such a sky. In some other Van Gogh paintings, the sky is green. And to see this work in 3 dimensions, where the brushstrokes are so pronounced that they're almost autonomous. And they're very vigorous, as if they're registering emotions, but at the same time, they are brushstrokes are almost saying to you, I'm a brushstroke, I'm also a branch. So this kind of autonomy of the brushstrokes even may be forecast to some extent. It's not abstraction yet, but it may forecast abstraction later on with artists like Kandinsky. Therefore, we have in the title of the exhibition Van Gogh to Kandinsky, because it seems to be a logical progression at this time. And speaking of Kandinsky, we put the 2 images here together that are on the catalog cover. Our story begins with Van Gogh, ends with Kandinsky, or better, it ends with World War I, at which point Kandinsky was venturing into abstraction and leader of the Munich Blau Reiter group, one of the most cosmopolitan artistic circles in Europe. And it's really the cosmopolitanism that prevailed before World War I that this exhibition is all about. And it's more than just France and Germany. After all, none of the artists we've looked at yet are French or German. But if we explore more precisely where paintings by Van Gogh, Gauguin, Cézanne were shown, we will see that the geographical heart of this story is in France and Germany. So in 1908, alone, Van Gogh's Pollard Willows at Sunset was shown at the Galerie Bernheim June in Paris, the Moderne Kunsthandlung in Munich, which were a major modern art gallery in Munich, the Galerie Richter in Dresden, which is where the Brücke artists were, and the Kunstverein in Frankfurt, as well as the Galerie Paul Kassir in Berlin. So Kandinsky, at this time, was living and working in Munich. In fact, he brought many modern art, French art paintings to Munich himself as director of the Phalanx organization. So we know this painting was there at the time that Kandinsky's painting, also seen here, was painted just a year later. Now, of course, I'm not saying that there's a one-to-one relationship here, for we know that, for example, even if Kandinsky's colleague, Alexei Yavlinsky, owned his own Van Gogh, and he was an enthusiast, But we know the story is much more complex. So if we look closely at Arabian Cemetery, just for a moment, it was based on a trip to Tunis that Kandinsky took with Gabriele Munter around 1904 and did some watercolors. But later on, they were living in the outskirts of Paris around 1906 to 7 for more than a year, and Kandinsky was showing at the Salon d'Automne and the Salon des Indépendants, winning prizes. In fact, they were showing there, these two artists, along with Jawlensky for 5 years. Other artists in the same exhibitions in Paris included Gauguin, the Fauves, and so certainly we know some of that rubbed off on Kandinsky. So the question then becomes, would a painting like Arabian Cemetery be possible without French art? And here we must encounter the great titans of modernism, Cézanne and Gauguin, as well as a number of other important neo-impressionist painters. I've mentioned Paul Signac because he was quite a favorite, and as well as the Nabi, during such artists as Pierre Bonnard, as well as Matisse and the Fauves. But to explore these influences further, we need to have some idea of what paintings these artists could have seen. The question now becomes, how, when, and where did artists in Germany see French art? And what might these artists have seen during the time they were traveling in Paris? Hence, we decided to look at Expressionism not just as a history, but as a kind of geography of art. And here we have a map, just to remind everyone, where some of the crucial cities we were looking at were Berlin, Dresden, Hagen, Weimar, Munich, and of course Paris. And I love this kind of animated, whimsical map that our designer did in LA, we put on the wall, and it kind of enlivens the thing. Also looks a little bit like a crime scene, body outline. But I do believe Expressionism is still alive, but anyway. As we look at this cosmopolitan kind of environment, we see a kind of network of connections between France and Germany that prevailed before World War I, and it involves not just the artists, although they're the most important. It involves collectors, dealers, museum directors, exhibitions, artists' travel, and discussions. And these discussions may have taken place at the Café des Westens in Berlin or at the Café du Dôme in Paris, and also in key periodicals. And the critics were very important. Sometimes the critics would say, oh, we just saw that terrible artist Van Gogh, and here comes the idiot Gauguin. They might have said that, but they also were people like Meyer-Graefe, Julius Meyer-Graefe, who wrote the first history of modern art from a French point of view, although he was German, and saw Paris as the fountainhead of modernism. So it's just this discussion that's extremely important, happened in magazines because they hadn't invented the internet yet. Well, we've already seen how important Kassir was in his, I mentioned him a couple of times. Paul Kassir had a very important gallery in Berlin, and we could say, we looked at this exhibition at about 1,000 paintings. We could have looked at more, but we traced when and where they were. And if you just consider the map again for a moment, these cities are all linked by rail lines, and the rail lines go on further to Moscow. So you have artists like Ambroise Vollard in Paris selling works to Ivan Shukin in Moscow, but Kassir could organize, presentation of some of these paintings along the way in Berlin and find more customers. So all of these connections, especially with the new train lines that were developed in the 19th century, really allowed this network to function. So Kassir, being so important, he was one of the first to exhibit Van Gogh's works, 1901 retrospective, but he also showed paintings such as this one by Paul Cézanne. In fact, already in 1898, he was exhibiting avant-garde artists, notably Cézanne, and he helped Hugo van Schudy, who was the director of the National Gallery in Berlin, when he wanted to buy his first modern artists, among them Paul Cézanne. He bought early Paul Cézanne, Manet, and also Van Gogh. And it didn't make the Kaiser very happy, but so there was this tension, but this innovative art museum director bought these paintings. Now, this particular painting He exhibited in 1900 and again in 1901, along with a dozen other Cézannes, and he had already been sold by Vollard to Emil Heibout, who was a Berlin critic, but also a collector of Impressionism, with a collection very, very strong in Monet. And then he in turn sold this painting back to Kassir. So it's a really beautiful painting from the Metropolitan Museum, has all the characteristics of Cézanne, where he begins to distort the still life in order to make the composition work better, ignoring whether the apples are seen from different point of views, whether or not in the real world they'd fall off the table. We know Cézanne was creating a wonderful masterpiece. Well, Kassir also owned this important Signac painting and exhibited in his Berlin gallery in 1902, and his branch in Hamburg in 1903. And just as importantly, it was seen in 1905 in a French Impressionism and Neo-Impressionism show in Weimar, organized by Harry Kessler. And this was another find, by the way, by our astute curator, Anne Grace, coming from a Canadian collection. Now, Signac was one of the Expressionists' favorites, who had set themselves against pure Impressionism, which they held to be too empirical. But Signac's mystical haze really engaged them. And you can see this here. You can barely see the objects. You see the atmosphere. And actually, artists all across Europe were entirely infatuated with Neo-Impressionism. Another example shown by Kessler, Harry Kessler in Weimar in 1903, was this luminous painting by the Belgian artist Theo van Ruyselbergh, who had previously worked in a more symbolist mode. Now, Kessler is really another of these fascinating figures. He was an aristocrat with connections to the Kaiser, and these connections may have been, he had a very beautiful mother that the Kaiser seems to have taken an interest in, but also a very important father who was a businessman, actually had holdings in Canada. But, through these connections, the family were made, Harry Kessler became a count. And he was quite wealthy, and had residences in Berlin and Weimar, designed by Henri van der Velde. He maintained hotel suites in London and Paris, and he was well connected then with the avant-garde artists, and he never stayed in one place more than 3 or 4 days, and then he didn't have a private jet, he didn't have those yet, so he took the train, and commuted among these cities in the train, and he was so, he was very interested, even though he was connected with the royal family, which was very conservative. He could take enfant terrible of Berlin, and who had been in Berlin in a big scandal, Edvard Munch, and have this self-portrait done by Edvard Munch. And then, you know, he would be hanging out with artists in Paris on the weekends. He would be having weekly salons in Berlin, sometimes with government ministers. But in Weimar, he was really an innovative museum director. And he organized all kinds of exhibitions. He was eventually fired for showing Rodin nudes. Now, we have the Rodin nudes. They still exist, and we thought about putting them in the exhibition. We weren't too worried about being censored because they're pretty tame. So maybe it was because he liked French art too much that he was fired. Because there was some pushback among more conservative German artists. Now, the other interesting thing about Kessler, before I just leave him, is that he wrote everything down. So he maintained diaries since his boarding school days in England when he was about 12. So his life was so engaged, he knew about 10,000 people, the scholars have figured out. He wrote it all down, and we have the diaries that are now being published. And we thought maybe up until about World War, sometime in the 20s, they ended, but then they found in a safety deposit box in Mallorca another whole bunch of leather-bound diaries. So these are now being published, so we already have in our library about this many on the shelf. And we got one more volume we're expecting, and even that's not everything. So if you're very interested in this fellow, Harry Kessler, please read, this is a plug, please read the chapter by Laird Easton in the catalog. Laird Easton actually had a bestseller on the, I think it was on the New York Times list when he translated some of Kessler's diaries. And he's also written a book about Kessler called The Red Count, which also alludes to his radical nature. By the way, he, in World War I, was a diplomat in Bern and entrusted by the German government with negotiating with France for some peace terms. Didn't work, but shows that he was really a complex and interesting guy. Well, one of the things he did when he was so fascinated with Neo-Impressionism was to commission Henri Edmond Cross to paint this portrait. So this is a commission from Kessler, and we see it here hanging in Kessler's study in Weimar, designed by Henri van der Velde. You can see it up above the bookcase. And we can see here that Cross, rather than being concerned about anatomy, is much more concerned about taking the little brushwork of Neo-Impressionism and expanding it into color areas. Now, if you're thinking of Matisse, consider that Cross would often summer. He had a place near Saint-Tropez, where Signac also had a summer place, and Signac had a lot of parties, and both artists and Matisse would show up at the parties. And by now, Matisse is even ahead of Cross, because this is 1906. So some of Matisse's influence may be seen already in this painting. Now, it's immediate. We had Neo-Impressionism also among the Brücke artists. But as we can see from this wonderful Erich Heckel sketch, which is in the exhibition, coming from the Brücke Museum, it's really wonderful to get this because pastel, color chalk works often don't travel. So it's wonderful to get it, and there are very few like it. Now we can see here, and Erich Heckel is a member of the Dresden Brücke group, that he's very much influenced by Van Gogh in the sky. The brushwork is just going, it's like brushwork, and we also have paintings where it uses this very interesting brushwork. Now, the founding members of the Brücke were Fritz Bleyl, Erich Heckel, Ernst Ludwig Kirchner, and Carl Schmidt-Rottluff. They were all very familiar with Neo-Impressionism because even their teachers in applied art schools knew knew this style. And pretty soon, Kuno Amiet, Emil Nolde, Max Pechstein, all of whom are in the exhibition, joined the Brücke group. And what really knocked their socks off was the Van Gogh show that Kassir brought to Dresden in 1905. And he showed it he had galleries in various places, but he lent it to a gallery, Gallery Arnold in Dresden in 1905, just months after the group was founded. And Fritz Schumacher, their teacher, recalled that they were totally beside themselves when they saw this exhibition. And it certainly was an alternative to what Fritz Bleyl, one of their members, called the accidental, merely frugal natural impression of Impressionism. So Impressionism was to them like a snapshot. It was just not very invested in artistic response. Of course, we may not believe that, but they did. In fact, they got so involved with Van Gogh that Nolde, one of their members, said, why don't we just call ourselves the Van Goghians? Because they're Van Gogh maniacs. Well, this work by Erich Heckel shows, and this work really shows how Heckel took Van Gogh but made Van Gogh his own. You could still see in the sky that very elaborate and gestural brushwork. But notice that everything's been amplified. He's incorporated fauve colors and really made a powerful composition. Now, he might have gotten an F from his teacher because he seems to have run out of space at the top. Now, I think he did that on purpose because it really charges up the painting. And actually, I think it's one of his best. And I one time took it to Berlin for the Brücke exhibition, all about Heckel, and I was very proud. It's actually our painting. And I'm really proud of it because after looking at it for a couple of decades, seeing it in this new light, it seemed to be one of the best. But in any case, you see that he has made Van Gogh's style his own. It's very, very stunning, very beautiful colors. So take a look at it up in the exhibition. Well, the French fauves were equally inspired by Van Gogh, as you can see from this 1905 painting by Maurice De Blanc, which seems to be a direct transcription of emotional experience. It's interesting to note, I mentioned that Van Gogh retrospective in Paris, it's interesting to note that Derain and De Blanc met one another. First, they met each other on a train around 1900. But the first time they got together, all three of them, with Matisse, was at that retrospective, Van Gogh retrospective in 1901 at the Bernheim June Gallery. And there were more than 70 objects in this exhibition. Actually, Matisse already owned his own Van Gogh drawing at the time, so they didn't really have to convince him. Well, clearly, De Blanc had works like this by Van Gogh in mind, which can be seen in the current exhibition, which we brought from Los Angeles, the Hammer Collection. And, of course, both artists have common roots in Millet, where the worker theme would certainly have appealed to the Expressionists as it did to the Neo-Impressionists as an alternative to that sort of leisurely life portrayed in Impressionism. At this time, André Derain and De Blanc were painting together in the northern suburbs of Paris along the Seine, Château and La Pec. Derain was moving from the small brushstrokes of Neo-Impressionism to more blocky and more decorative forms seen in this painting. It's really an interesting painting, coming from a private collection, has not been seen in any public art exhibition since the 1960s. So I encourage you to, it's really wonderful that we have it here, so I encourage you to take a close look at it. In 1905, Matisse and Derain spent the summer at Collioure, a small fishing village at the base of the Pyrenees. And the works they presented there show a newfound freedom. Color and color chords become dynamic, space, and light. Traditional perspective was abandoned. This stay in Collioure has been considered the birth of Fauvism. Matisse was seeking to balance color and design and working a lot with arabesques. So he began choosing colors to complete a pattern rather than being concerned about the actual color of an object. Now, the sketchiness here is very much like a watercolor, and because he painted on a white ground, you can see that coming through. It's very white. First, he paints the canvas all white. This gives it a very lyrical effect. So it's really quite wonderful. Now, at the end of the summer, Matisse, remember, had been getting together with Signac, and actually had spent the previous summer painting with Signac. Signac didn't like the way Matisse was going, exactly. He's going away from Signac. So Matisse writes a letter back to Signac, and he says, well, he's only been able to create de petits choses, peut-être pas très importantes. So little things, probably not very important. Well, we know they were extremely important, and they were shown at the Fauve exhibition, so-called the Salon d'Automne in 1905. And by the way, this painting also belonged to Sarah and Michael Stein, the very important collectors in Paris. Some of you may have seen the Steins Collect exhibition when it was down in New York or over in Paris. And San Francisco. So it was really a wonderful exhibition documenting these very, very important American collectors who kept their apartments open to artists specific days of the week. And they also supported Matisse, helped Matisse on his various trips to Germany and his academy. Well, we see that, we can take another look here at De Blanc, see what he was doing. Now, he's a self-taught painter. So as an autodidact, he sought to use color to rebel against the academy. And he said, I want to scream with my colors. The rebellions against the École des Beaux-Arts. And I want to translate my feelings without thinking about what has already been painted. So his approach is very instinctive, and often his scenes lack figures, but his colors and also can be rather arbitrary. So yes, it could be a blue building and a green door, but maybe, or red under the arches, but maybe it was simply his feeling at that moment. And what's interesting to me is sometimes he just took the paint right out of the tube. I'm not even sure he used a brush. So looking at that red line in the middle of the picture, if you go up to look at that painting in the exhibition, you'll see it's just pure paint. Probably get an F from an art teacher if he had an art teacher, but to me, it makes the painting. He spoke about transporting into orchestration of pure colors all the sentiments that were perceptible to me. I was a tender barbarian full of violence, that's what he said. But of course, Van Gogh's influence is also very palpable in a painting like this. Well, Georges Braque, after first studying at Le Havre in Normandy, Braque arrives in Paris in 1902, where he discovered the new avant-garde, and he encountered Fauvism at the Salon d'Automne in 1905, so he comes to it just a few months later. And we know of Braque that he's one of the inventors of Cubism with Picasso, so almost right after this painting. So it's a very, very short-lived period that Braque is a Fauvist, so we're very lucky to have this painting, as there are not that many of them. Comes from Dusseldorf in Germany. And you can see here that he's now using these colors just almost in an abstract way. He's reduced the landscape down to maybe 3 trees, and he's regulated the rolling countryside into some sort of patterns, and he's not letting emotion alone control his colors, but instead is making kind of solid constructions with his colors, and rather than being intoxicated by the colors, he creates these very precious harmonies that have a penchant for subtle roses and mauve violets. So this is really from the climax of his career as a Fauvist. Here he is, he's about 24 or 25 years old. He paints like this. Well, he worked also, he went to L'Estaque, where Cézanne had been, and he worked with Anton Fries. So just to give you a quick peek, there's 2 beautiful Anton Fries, 3 of them actually, but 2 landscapes in the exhibition. This is one that we were so happy to get from the Musée des Beaux-Arts participation in the exhibition. When we opened this up in LA, we were just amazed. Just a really wonderful painting. We have another one from the Museum of Fine Arts in San Francisco. And this just gives you an idea of what he was doing. Now, Matisse was, of course, our premier Fauve. And he made his breakthrough in 1905, as we were able to document. And he's clearly going for these color zones. So this painting, a little bit later, shows you Matisse's mature style of these zones of colors. Now, Matisse may have gotten the idea, though, of some of his ideas about nudes from this painting, which Matisse owned, which is also in the exhibition. So it's a possible origin of Matisse's subject matter. And let us not forget that Matisse, in his signature essay, we look at the Matisse very quickly again, he wrote an essay called Notes of a Painter in 1907, which was translated into German and published in 1908, in which he said, "What I am for above all is expression." So here he's using the word, in German it's Ausdruck. Here he's using a word, expression, before that expressionist term ever comes into existence. Now, he did not mean the expression, he was very careful to tell you this, he does not mean the attitude on the woman's face. He means, whether she's angry or happy, he means the entire composition, whether there's any figures in it or not, are for him a kind of expression. And I'll show you one painting that's not in the exhibition. We were only able to get it for Zurich, but you'll see it in the catalog. And I just want to mention it, since we have many beautiful pictures here, by the way, that Zurich would kill for, that you get, and they don't. So don't worry about that. But this is one that slipped away. But I just want to show it to you because it shows Matisse's, how he uses his color zones, and also to indicate that this is one that was shown in Kassir's gallery in 1907, along with watercolors by Cézanne. And we know that Haeckel and Schmidt-Rottluff, the Brücke artists, saw this show. And it's at this time, in 1908, that the Brücke and the Fauves are actually showing together in Dresden. So the artists actually were knew well what the others were doing. So here we begin to see some of the, focus a little bit for a few minutes on the Brücke artists. First, a bridge, by the way, Brücke translates to bridge, and this was their kind of way of saying, we are the bridge from the past through the present to the future. Now, they really stole that term from Nietzsche, but that's basically what they meant. Now, during, actually, Pechstein lived in Paris from in 1908, and late 1907 and 1908, and he apparently made contact with the Fauve artists. We're not quite sure to what extent, but we know that he got to know Kees van Dongen quite well and persuaded him to join the Brücke. Now, the Fauvist influence can be discerned in the broadening of the same thing, Pechstein's sort of neo-impressionist style into vivacious painting with expansive zones of color, articulated in loose brushstrokes, depicting the female body in some cases slightly unnaturalistically, like the green in the hair, for example. And we could say that Pechstein is a little unusual, and he really did receive some formal training. So you see his mastery, for example, in the face, which he can just render with just a few lines. You can see he's really quite a talented artist. Well, this work by Kees van Dongen has really been a favorite in all the venues of the exhibition. We have it here too, of course. And I liked it so much, it's actually on the English, since you may have all looked at the English version of the catalog, it's on the cover. And it was also the first painting we had in our Zurich venue because it seems to ask so many questions. Where did this style come from? Also, I love it because it defies the categories that we're all so comfortable with. First of all, the artist, as I mentioned before, Kees van Dongen is not French or German, he's Dutch. He's both exhibiting with both the Fauves and the Brücke, so he's a Fauve artist and a Brücke artist. And it's a really beautiful image. He uses he has this real trust in color, but the figure he's portraying, the soprano, is not a woman, it's a man. So I love the fact that everything you see about this is really something else. It's a very famous female impersonator, and van Dongen decided to pick up subjects like this partly under the influence of his buddy, Picasso, who said, oh, you really should take a look at some of the entertainers and circus people. They're really interesting folks to portray. And I think you can say that this figure is on stage because it seems to be lit from below. And you see that intense yellow light coming up on the underside of her chin, or his chin, cheek, and so on. So that artificiality is also quite wonderful. So it's really a bold painting. We're lucky to get it from the Museum of Modern Art in New York. Another of the responses is Kirchner, who many would consider, Ernst Ludwig Kirchner, many would consider him not only the leading Brücke expressionist, but the leading expressionist of Germany. He's really considered one of the most innovative of all the artists. Now, you may be shocked to hear that Kirchner was not telling the truth when he wrote in 1919 that he could not possibly have been influenced by Matisse. And he went on to say, this was to his catalog raisonné writer, he said, well, you know, Matisse, Munch, well, I didn't even know them by name. Even though supposedly they invited Matisse to join the Brücke at one point. Well, this is just, I think, go back to Picasso, who allegedly said, you know, good artists borrow, great artists steal. And this means that a great artist can take anything he wants and make it his own, and certainly Kirchner was one of those. So whatever he had to do with Matisse, you'll see, in the end doesn't resemble Matisse anymore. But this is a kind of transitional painting. And we know, actually, that at Kassir's gallery in Berlin, there was a huge retrospective that if we could all get in a time machine and go back and never come back again even, would be worth it, because this retrospective, which Matisse hung himself, included the Blue Nude, it included the breakfast room that's now in the Hermitage, and roughly some 40 other works, and it included a lot of his sculpture. So it was really amazing, and we know that Haeckel and we know that Pechstein and Kirchner wrote a postcard back to Haeckel saying, best regards, yours Ernst, Matisse is at times really wild, yours Max. We know they saw the exhibition. And this work, of course, alludes back to, as you can see, this Blue Nude in Baltimore, which was in the Steins Collect show, which we tried to get, but you know, they needed it for something else. It often happens. But you all know it anyway. It's a really amazing painting. And you can see that Kirchner's sort of splotchy application of hues in his palette and his reclining nude in front of the mirror are indebted to Matisse. And even if he confined the decorativeness just to the curtain in the background. Now, this is one reason we have the Nabi in the exhibition, because it shows that the French artists incorporated the decorative into painting much more than the German artists. So imagine Max Beckmann coming into that Matisse show in Berlin in 1909, Beckmann, and he's still sort of an Impressionist painter. He looks at the exhibition, he just starts sputtering. He just says, one effrontery after the next, why don't they make cigarette packages? Well, you know, Max Beckmann, as this kind of ferocious German artist, he was actually very successful. He was a big superstar as a German Impressionist at that time. For him, the painting was too flat, too French, and too feminine. And that's just the way they thought at that time. It has nothing to do with reality. But you'll see that that actually throughout his career, Max Beckmann kept a little depth in his paintings. That's where he thought all the action should be. So it just shows you that Matisse, there was even Kassir didn't really want to show him, but he was persuaded. So it just shows you there was some resistance and there's some differences in these cultures that are interacting with each other. Well, we have this wonderful painting in the exhibition as well, and it shows you really how Kirchner, after he saw Matisse, he gave his colors a kind of watercolor-like fluidity and a lightness as he experimented with bold compositions and color planes, flattening them into depth. Here he portrays Marcella, who's one of the young models favored by the Brücke artists. The composition here maybe is a little reminiscent even of Van Gogh in his bedroom where he distorts the floor coming up and so forth. And one thing that a lot of people like to say about Kirchner and Matisse is that perhaps Kirchner learned something from Matisse about line. And in order to explore that, we have a number of works in the exhibition, including this woodcut, which is based very exactly on a Matisse drawing. And it gives you an idea of, we have a couple more woodcuts and a lithograph. It gives you an idea of the command Matisse had of line. It starts right at the beginning of the exhibition. And we could look at something like this work by Kirchner, which certainly alludes to the Blue Nude, and see that, well, he's quite good at line as well. Now, I got curious about this and went to Davos, where they have the boring economic meetings. And I went there to look at Kirchner sketchbooks. Well, there's about 140 of them there. And you'll see in 1907, whenever, Kirchner didn't need any help. He was a fantastic draughtsman. He could capture dancers jumping in the air with just a few lines, so probably he didn't get that much from Matisse from line. But I do think that compositions like this show you that maybe he learned something about composition from Matisse. That's my theory. It's possibly true. And he did many of these experiments with this model, which was Doris Grosse, his girlfriend at the time, whom he called Dodo. So you can see these using color to structure the composition. Now this painting also comes from this time. It's given different titles. We're calling it the Dance Hall of Bellevue and its buildings in Dresden. And this painting is now in the National Gallery, but it used to hang in the dining room of Ruth and Jacob Kanan. They were wonderful people and they had a huge collection of graphics by Kirchner. They had their own curator and it's a fantastic collection. But Ruth just did not believe Matisse had anything to do with this painting. And I had nice discussions with her. She sent me a 5-page letter one time, reminding me of a few things, reminding me of the notes of the painter. Matisse said that Matisse saw his art as a soothing, calming influence on the mind, something like a good armchair to provide relaxation from physical fatigue. You'd never catch a German expressionist with that idea, she told me. And I said, well, yeah, but these artists went to Paris. He said, well, everybody goes to Paris. And then finally, she said, well, I had a very interesting artist sitting in my dining room, and he just asked me, do you know if Matisse ever saw Kirchner? So she really, and by the way, she had de Kooning's in her living room, and de Kooning has the same pink that you see along the road there. So we still probably could do a little more research on the real influence, actually, of Kirchner. So anyway, we're happy to have it in the exhibition. I think it's really a wonderful painting. Now, this painting by Erich Heckel begins to show you the sort of transformation that the Brücke took on their own direction. We saw the Heckel chalk drawing a few minutes ago. Now, a favorite theme of the Brücke artists was this transformation of puberty, and it's a symbolic association with renewal and artistic creativity. So the subject here is Lina Franziska, or Franzi Fairman, who was about 10 years old when this painting was done, and one of several children of workers and performers that the artists used as models. Now, the broad color zones here of the couch recalls the work of Henri Matisse, while the girl's face and body reflects the Brücke's growing interest in African masks that they were studying in the Dresden Ethnographic Museum. So I just wanted to always have in the exhibition works that showed the artists reaching their own maturity and going their own direction. I'm not trying to say even that it's a Francophile movement. I'm only trying to look here and there at the relationship of French artists. Well, by now you might be asking, where are all the women? Because we haven't looked at any women yet. And I think it's important to think about this. There are only 3 women in the exhibition, and this is in part, hopefully not our fault, but it was a situation at the time when women, for example, in Germany could not go to the art academy. They could only study in applied art schools, which actually were more interesting places. Now, Paula Modersohn, very, very interesting artist who unfortunately died at the age of 30, very soon after this painting was done, actually went to Paris 4 times. And she, in Paris, she could study at the Académie Colarossi and the other private academies and the École des Beaux-Arts. And in this atmosphere, she could do life drawing classes or whatever she wanted. And she took a very intense interest in Cézanne and Gauguin and saw the exhibitions, of course, at the Galerie Boulard and all the salons. And she was also, we know that she visited a very important collection, the Gustave Fayet collection of Gauguin's. This painting, for example, which LACMA owns, was in that collection. We have in the exhibition here in Montreal 3 of the Breton paintings. They're very, very interesting. You can see a painting like this. If you're back on the other side of the room, it's sort of deep kind of landscape, but as you get up close to it, you'll see the color areas are sort of symbolist colors. Colors starting to take their own autonomy, and this must have made quite an impression on the Expressionists. We also have this beautiful Haystacks painting from the National Gallery in Washington. This one, by the way, was in one of, remember Harry Kessler in Weimar. Before he got fired, in around 1905, he actually visited Fayet in Paris and said, I've got to have these paintings, I've got to have them in Weimar right away. So a few months later, he had a huge Gauguin exhibition in Weimar. This painting was in that exhibition. In any case, we know that Paula Modersohn visited that collection, and we know also that she studied those wonderful Egyptian tomb painting portraits, many different influences that she had. And of course, she wasn't interested here in perfect anatomy. In fact, we know she's interested in non-Western cultures. She was interested in Henri Rousseau. And of course, she was interested in Gauguin in his Tahitian period. And we have a couple of wonderful paintings in the exhibition. This one we know was a very interesting one that we know was in Dresden in 1910. And it shows, it's of course very typically has a plain background, figures more simplified, and the little boy in the woman's lap might be Gauguin's son through his Tahitian mistress, we're not sure. In any case, we now see that works like this must have had a very powerful influence. And even Kirchner, remember the guy who had nothing to do with French art? You see, he made the poster for the exhibition in this woodcut, copying Gauguin's portrait of his mother. And these 2 works we were not able to bring because they couldn't come across the ocean, but we document them in the catalog. And so I think you'll agree that it's quite an interesting comparison. By the way, Zurich didn't get any Tahitian paintings like you guys get. You guys get wonderful ones. Now, Jawlensky, now if we look at the Blau Rider, and we actually know that we know that people like Jawlensky were very interested in Gauguin. And we will see how crucial someone like Gauguin was for the Blau Rider group. Jawlensky was really an important conduit because even though Kandinsky went to Paris, it was really Jawlensky who helped him kind of shake him a little bit and say, really look at these folks. Well, in 1907, Jawlensky visited Matisse's studio. We already know that he owned a Van Gogh, but he really started moving at this time over to Gauguin, which he introduced to Kandinsky and Munter. Now we see here in a work like this, he's using the more flamboyant fauve colors, as can be seen in this painting. But by 1912, which is a couple of years later, he's really made it his own. This is really Jawlensky's signature style, with the kind of schematicizing of the face, which continues on in his later work, and these really bright colors. And notice that the face is filling up the whole composition, really making it much more powerful. So this is a great painting that we have in the exhibition that you're able to see. It's very luminous. Now, another of the women in the exhibition, also a member of the Blau Reiter, was Jawlensky's Russian partner, Marianna van Werfkind. And you can see also that Gauguin was really crucial for her as well. She was very interested in the Dabi, their symbolist colors, and she spent her summers also in Murnau with Kandinsky, Gabriele Munter, and Jawlensky. And in Murnau, gives you a notion of it, these mountains in the background. In Murnau, an alpine village, you have very bright sun at times, lighting up some areas of the landscape, and then you have these deep, deep, somber shadows. So just the light itself in that particular environment made an impression on these artists. Now this painting, you can see also Van Gogh, the brushwork. We actually hung this next to a Van Gogh in LA, and I just think that Gabriela can stand up to Van Gogh. She's really a really marvelous painter. Also, she has a bit of the sort of spiritual attitude, if you will, of Van Gogh. This is called Corpus Christi, and she was, I think, interested in those aspects of Van Gogh, who himself at one point wanted to be a priest and always thought of his work as somewhat pantheistic. Here's the painting that we used, and this is looking wonderful here in Montreal next to the self-portrait. And by the way, we're indebted to Helene Kroller-Müller, the great collector, because she collected over 200 Van Goghs, which you can still see at the Kroller-Müller Museum in the middle of Holland. This is the largest collection of Van Goghs outside of the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam. Well, here's Kandinsky when he's in Murnau. It's actually a street in Murnau. And now Kandinsky was really rather a stubborn artist about his palette. I don't know if some of you saw the show or seen the catalog for this Path to Abstraction exhibition a few years ago at the Tate. But an exhibition like that, you could see all of these Kandinskys, and you could see he only changed his colors around 1905 and again around 1909. Everything else he might change, but not his colors. So we know that this is a very crucial time for him. Of course, his painting is now becoming a little more abstract, it's becoming more two-dimensional. He's worrying less about perspective. There's still some there, but he's on his way to abstraction. Meanwhile, Gabriele Munter, his partner, with whom they spent several months together in Sèvres, outside of Paris, also was interested in Gauguin, and I think the plain background here with the figures silhouetted in front of it show that. Now she's taken, both of them, Kandinsky and Munter, were very interested in folk cultures. They were interested in the Hinterglasmalerei, paintings on glass that were illuminated from behind. That's why some of those paintings of Kandinsky's are so luminous. Gabriele Munter could just make a tabletop with her own little collection of folk art just into a new, completely different universe. So by simplifying forms, using this new language in a painting like this, I think she accomplishes that. Another of the great artists in the Blau Reiter group, and now we look a little bit at absorption of Cubism, is Franz Marc. And Franz Marc was, as a person, Kandinsky's other major co-organizer of the Blau Reiter. First of all, their book, the Blau Reiter Almanac. And by the way, they had a group called the Neue Künstlervereinigung München, which is sort of the Munich artist group. And what happened is that the other artists, after Kandinsky and Munter and Marc and Jawlensky, founded this group as they rejected one of Kandinsky's paintings. Too abstract. So Kandinsky and Mark were working on this book, so they came up with a really sexy exhibition title, Exhibition of the Editors of the Blaureiter Almanac. So therefore we shorten it to Blaureiter, or if some of you are German, we have to put Der Blaureiter in front of it. If we want to be really technically correct about that. Now, the Blue Rider is actually an allusion back to the St. George and the Dragon. So you'll see that it's another way the artists sort of look at themselves as kinds of saviors. And so that was one of Kandinsky's favorite themes. Now, as we look at this Franz Marc painting called Stables, we can see that by 1913, that Marc is completely restructuring the canvas with these kinds of abstract ruminations, if you will, made up of prismatic forms, harmonic curves of these horses in a stable. His art is very deeply pantheistic. He saw animals as being more attuned to nature than human beings, and so he portrayed this by having these kinds of rhythmic compositions to imply kind of a rhythmic cosmos behind the appearance of nature. And some people look at this canvas and you have to say, oh, that's stables, before they see the horses and the stables, because it's so just on its own so powerful. Now we know of Franz Marc's influences here. Really the artist that most influenced Marc at this time was Robert Delaunay. And we can see that progress in this painting. It's just a painting which he called landscape and exhibited in the Blaureiter exhibition. And during that time, he saw Delaunay's work. So right after the Blaureiter exhibition in 1911, he repainted it. And so what you're seeing now is the repainted version, which has a more crystalline form, sort of in this avalanche, and now he calls it mountains, which also alludes, crystals and mountains allude back to German Romanticism. You think of Caspar David Friedrich, for example. Well, we also know that Marc visited Delaunay in Paris, and they started quite an interesting relationship. Now, one of the Delaunay paintings we have in the exhibition is this Eiffel Tower, and this shows what Guillaume Apollinaire called Delaunay's Orphism. So that's how that term came about. Now, you see that Delaunay has his own take on Cubism. He has the tower seen from above, from below, different points of view. We also see some of vestiges. This reproduction is a little too whited out, but if you go look at the painting, you'll see areas of more prismatic forms in the painting. And I should say, too, that we are unable to get the painting that was in the Blaureiter exhibition because it was destroyed in World War II. The man who owned it was the rich uncle of Macke, one of the artists, and August Macke, through his wife. And this rich uncle, his name was Bernhard Kohler, took them to Paris, bought everything they wanted to buy, built up a wonderful collection, paid for one of Herwig Walden's huge exhibitions, very good supporter of the arts. But unfortunately, he owned a factory near Berlin, which was bombed in World War II. But fortunately, he had a little trouble in the 20s when they had the big inflation in Germany. He sold about half his collection, so some of it survived. But that's why we have this painting. But this painting actually toured with the Blaureiter show on some 12 venues. So the Blaureiter, it was seen in Berlin in 1912. It's a very important painting. And then another, this is August Macke now, and this is a wonderful painting in the exhibition. Macke and Paul Klee got together, and in 1914 they met in Marseille and went over to travel to Tunisia. And this is where Paul Klee, who had been using mostly black and white, suddenly said, now I'm a painter. So it was that Mediterranean light. Well, here we see Macke using, this is not the best, it's a little pixelated, so go look at the actual painting. But you'll see that he's using these kinds of abstract forms. And actually, you could turn it, if you turned it 90 degrees, the dog would be upside right. If you turned it 90 degrees again, the peasant woman would be upside right. So it's kind of more about the composition, defying gravity, if it will, but it's more about the composition than portraying an actual scene that he saw. So he's combining palm trees. A cow is right there, so it's landscape with cow. So we also have in the exhibition actually several really beautiful Paul Klees, showing Paul Klee's reaction to Tunisian landscape, its architecture, And I will say that these are really rare. So you get to see several of them. If you were to go to the Paul Klee Foundation in Bern, they have 8,000 objects, but they only have a handful from this period. They are so rare. And it's even more amazing when you look at a watercolor, because it's a very fugitive form, and we can't expose them to the light for very long. Well, finally, we want to take a look at Kandinsky, because this painting, which actually comes from LACMA, is one of the most abstract Kandinskys you'll see at this time. And this painting, by the way, first belonged to Gabriele Munter, and then it belonged to Hans Hofmann. If you remember, Hans Hofmann comes in the 30s from Germany and is one of the main teachers of the abstract expressionists. So that painting eventually comes into our collection, we're very happy to say. But it's showing you that the kind of hallmark of Expressionism right before World War I. And here we have, of course, echoes of colors from Fauvism, tempered with this flashing light and somber shadows of Murnau, released into these animated forms, and they're rendered in this very highly charged brushwork that certainly harken all the way back to Van Gogh. And I think this is as close to abstraction as Kandinsky got. And then World War I breaks out, and he has 48 hours to leave the country because he is a Russian national. So suddenly, this whole group has to be dispersed. Well, you'll also see, and this is one of the more surprising paintings in the exhibition, you'll say, what is this wedding picture doing here? And many people have said, I'd like to have a wedding picture like that. And I say, even though none of the guests have feet, no, that doesn't matter. And maybe people like the little dog with his tongue out, although the little dog is actually too big. It's in the wrong scale. And, but still pretty cool painting. You actually have a self-portrait of Rousseau with his mustache back behind the bride. So it's a nice wedding picture, but that's not why it's in the exhibition, of course. And if you take a peek at our catalog and read Kathleen Kunzli's essay, you'll see that actually Donier Rousseau, or as he was called, the sort of customs officer, Donier Rousseau, Henri Rousseau, was a favorite. He was a favorite of everyone. The French artist had a big banquet for him. But if you look at the Blaureiter Almanac, you're going to see something like 7 reproductions of Rousseau. Actually, there were some Rousseaus in the Blaureiter exhibition, not this one, but this one was reproduced. This one was also in Uda, that was a famous German art historian, did a catalogue raisonné on Rousseau at this time that Kandinsky gobbled up. And so why is this here? I still haven't answered that question. And it's basically Kandinsky's theory of abstraction and realism, which, by the way, he stole from Wilhelm Bohringer, an art historian. And the idea is that every culture has whatever art styles it has when the artist is born. The artist is born into a culture, and he can't really help what he finds there, but he's the one who energizes it with his creativity. And so some cultures may tend towards abstraction, some towards realism. That's what Bohringer said. Kandinsky goes a step further, and he says, well, there's going to be a great age of abstraction, great age of realism, but for him, Rousseau was about the great realism. So, but what's really even more interesting about this theory, it sounds a bit anthropological, and what it allows is a kind of abstraction of how cultures work. It allows the Blaureiter to be one of the most interested in global cultures. So no longer is it just France and Germany, but now if you look at their Blaureiter Almanac, you'll see these shadow puppets, for example, that are coming from the Mediterranean area. You'll see Polynesian, you'll see things from the South Sea Islands, and you'll see African sculpture. You'll see an essay about masks, and so on. So it becomes more than just a cosmopolitan culture within Europe, and becomes an opening kind of embrace of all of humanity, sort of this global perspective. So when we started off this sort of period around 1900, and the exhibition shows you, the great exposition of 1900, just this battle between Germany and France. When you get to the end, when you get right to the eve of World War I, you're finding a very, not only cosmopolitan, but fully international kind of attitude among these artists. And that's what, why the Rousseau might be such an important painting. I also wanted to draw your attention to a couple of other things. The Cubism came to Germany through this big exhibition in Cologne called the Sonderbund. And we always wanted to look at when the paintings were where. We were really lucky to get this painting from the Kimball because they received from Chicago a whole lot of Gauguins. We got the Gauguin we wanted, and then we let Chicago send the rest down to Kimball. And since the Kimball never lends this painting, but they were putting it in storage, we said, oh, could we just have that one? So you're getting to see a painting that's pretty rarely travels. And so this was at this exhibition, and as today, those curators at the time wanted to get people interested in modern art. Instead of showing them only Braque and Picasso, and the Braque from the Guggenheim upstairs, or over there in the museum was there, they showed, first of all, 120 Van Goghs, over 25 Cézannes, over 25 Gauguins, just to introduce everyone to the idea of modern art. And then they showed works from Czech lands, Hungary, the Hungarian Fauves, and the latest things from Picasso. This was the Braque that they showed. You just take a look at it when you have a chance. It's from the Guggenheim. And then here you see some of the reactions. Someone like Schmidt-Rottluff, who is here absorbing. You can see that he's taken kind of the faceting of forms of Cubism, moved in his own way, and he has now his very broad color areas, not all very naturalistic, and that this picture is sort of suspended between forceful contrast and decorative elegance. Really beautiful, beautiful painting coming from the Brooklyn Museum. And then we have this painting, this woodcut, which is from Haeckel, who you saw earlier doing the kind of sketchy pastel. This is actually based on one of his own sculptures, which he now makes into a woodcut, which he puts into a crystalline sort of, alluding back to Romanticism, a crystalline environment, and then he hand colors it. And my wife was here will remember that we went to New York during Hurricane Sandy, and that's how we got this for the Rifkind Center, because we went to Hurricane Sandy to go to a print fair, and nobody else came because there was a hurricane. So I got to just go to the art dealers and say, well, I think I'll take that, without much competition. So we were very lucky to buy that one. But it is really a really wonderful woodcut. It's also up in the exhibition. Now finally, I promised that I would show Kirchner in a way that you might say, well, probably couldn't be done without Matisse, but it's not Matisse anymore. And this is this great street scene from the Museum of Modern Art. And Kirchner only did about 14 of these street scene paintings, so they're pretty hard to even get, but Momo is very generous, let us have it. And you'll see here that, first of all, the light is very sort of artificial, which is fitting because it's street scene. And the figures are streetwalkers, although we know they're also friends of, the models are friends of Kirchner. And we see also that there are some customers hanging around. And although there's certain eroticism to this idea of the streetwalkers who are wearing widow garb, because that was their costume, you had to be a little careful. Not that I was there, but you had to be a little careful because there were some real widows around. So there was sort of special language for the customers. But on the other hand, this does exploit women, and you might have had some awareness of this on Kirchner's part, because he has one figure looking into a shop window, sort of alluding to sort of merchandising. So it's a very complex, very interesting painting. But as far as the issue of France and Germany goes, look how Gothic it is. Look how elongated it is. And this happened right after Haeckel and Kirchner had created a kind of Gothic chapel at the Sonderbund exhibition. So this is Kirchner, who backs up and says, wait a minute, when people started throwing the term Expressionism around, which they did at this time, they started calling everything Expressionism, the Italian Futurists, the Cubists, the German artists, the Fauves, Hervé Thalden in Berlin, big gallerists, said they're all Expressionists. Now this is where Kirchner backs up and says, wait a minute. And he, just to convince everybody, he invented his own art critic. as a pseudonym. His name was Louis de Marsalle, and he wrote all about Kirchner. He said, well, Kirchner never looked at French art. You could put Kirchner's paintings right next to Cranach, of course. And he wrote very many interesting comments about how Kirchner made his woodcuts. So everybody got very interested, wanted to meet this guy. So Kirchner had to kill him off, of course. But he didn't tell anyone about this. So you had art historians up in the 30s and 40s just believing everything this guy wrote. But shows you, that at the time, the term was now being contested. The term Expressionism was being contested. And this is when the first monograph appears. It's called Expressionismus by Paul Fechter. It really says Expressionism is German, it's opposed to Impressionism, and it's very Nordic, and so forth. Now, this is on the eve of World War I, so while one could dispute it, there was no time. And the war ensued, and we have a wonderful section in the exhibition about World War I. And this whole cosmopolitan milieu, which the exhibition is all about, was really brought to an abrupt halt. Many artists and writers were swept up in a kind of euphoria at the beginning of the war, which they saw as signaling a cultural transformation away from the rigid hierarchies of the Wilhelmine society in Germany. So I already told you that people like Kandinsky and Jablinski had to leave immediately. But other artists, such as Mark and Maka, were compelled to shoot at their friends. They were compelled to go into battle. And, of course, we now know Maka died in the first months of the war. Maka lasted a couple of years. And Maka wrote diaries that are very interesting to read and did some wonderful sketches during the war. And others, like Kirchner, had what we now call post-traumatic stress disorder. He had sort of shell shock. And after the war, though, there was a resurgence of Expressionism, and the dealers had quite a good market until the Nazis arrived. The Nazis took these same artists and called them degenerate artists and persecuted them, as you probably know. And we have in the exhibition the Entartete Kunst brochure catalog. That, of course, after World War II was over with, these artists were rehabilitated again as a kind of essence of German culture. So, while that is true enough, the kind of cosmopolitan ambiance that we see in the exhibition was even more kind of obscured. So I hope you will find it possible to go into the exhibition and kind of take yourself back this period before World War I, and imagine not only this exchange and this great ambiance of sort of cosmopolitanism, but actually look at the paintings just as if you're seeing them for the first time. Or imagine how artists seeing them for the first time would have looked at them. So thank you very much.